Awesome. Welcome to another episode of Cup of Joe. I am your host, Joe van Kampen. We are filming this one live in front of our citizen think tank guests in Banff, and we're going to be talking about rebranding an entire organization as well as rebranding specific communities. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's exciting.
Awesome. So, Monica, you and I have known each other for, 5 years?
Yep.
It's been quite a while. And you went through a pretty significant rebrand around 2021. 2021.
Yep.
Can you tell us what led to that rebrand and tell us a little bit about your brand originally and where
Absolutely. It was triggered by a merger acquisition. So we were Tealwood Senior Living for approximately 33 years and privately owned and managed. And while we had some specific ownership in the communities that we built, we were primarily a management company. And after walking through COVID and some of the challenges that 2018 census and 2019, last quarter of 2019, everybody started to see a little bit of an uptick in senior living, a little bit of a slowdown in building new inventory. Then we were hit with COVID.
Right.
And so just as we were starting to see a spike, then we started to see that drop again. And everybody was just on emergency mode, I think, in every part of healthcare. And as we started to come out of COVID, there was an exhaustion. Our owners were looking to step back from ownership and looking at what would an exit strategy look like that would keep residents and staff at the center, and understanding that we were going to need to be a part of or develop our own new programs, that innovation is what was going to drive senior living in the future. So our owners, along with the owners, were connected with the LifeSpark owners, who already had an ecosystem of home care, hospice, physician groups, and a Medicare Advantage program called LifeSpark Complete that they were looking to put into senior living. And reading through innovative programs that had begun discussion in 2017 and 2018, we knew that there was a payer component that was going to need to come into senior living. So that marriage with both of those home offices being in the Minnesota metro area was perfect. So it almost felt like a divine connection.
Very cool.
And so that's how we started that journey into Tealwood becoming LifeSpark Senior Living.
Very cool. And can you tell us a little bit about how you approached that rebrand process within the communities?
Yeah, there was a lot of communication, and I think that seems like it's logical, but the amount of communication between senior leadership, staff, a lot of town hall meetings, not only PowerPoint-driven town hall meetings, but a lot of supporting Q&A documents and being accessible to your on-site staff and leadership staff was crucial. To be able to answer questions in the moment on what was the focus and drive behind what we were doing, what was the why, and the fact that there was safety and security in this merger, that people weren't losing their jobs. That when we talk about a brand shift, it's understanding why you're making that change, and so much more. As we talked about it actually in the think tank, which was excellent content, that your brand isn't your logo, it's not your collateral. It is your focus, your drive, your programs, and how that lands with the people that you're keeping at the center, and that's your staff and your residents. And basically explaining our why every single day. And I think one of the crucial core components of that is anticipating and trying your best to anticipate what the questions from staff would be, and what are the fears and concerns and a little bit of grief. We had people that worked with and under the Tealwood management we had some employees that were there for over 30 years that started and grew with the company. So there is a tremendous legacy that sometimes it's tough to let go, but if you can just constantly show your why this marriage, why this growth, and completing the circle in the ecosystem, bringing senior living into LifeSpark, how we could provide that continuum of care.
Okay, I have so many things to ask about that, and I absolutely love that. So I really like the fact that you said I'm basically focusing very heavily on the people first components and things like that. And of course, the number one concern with those aspects would be, am I going to lose my job? Or whatever.
First question.
Yeah, exactly.
Every
and
time.
So once you kind of get past that point and they know that they're safe, what other concerns did you see kind of popping up from that?
Absolutely. Understanding, would they be able to perform?
Right.
So when you're bringing in new and you're rolling out new programs, it's how, I've never seen this before. I don't know if I can do it. I don't know what the expectations are. Is it reasonable? So when you're bringing something new to the marketplace, there's a little bit of trepidation. So again, it goes back to, we have the processes in place.
Right.
You're going to help us develop this, so your feedback is key. So it's not, we have lots of lists of processes and programs, and it's a push down of information. We treat it like a collaboration, so we need feedback. So when we're rolling out a new program, even now, and will always in the future, we have project plans. And what we could do a better job is controlling the timing of all of our projects, because every department has a new thing they'd like to roll out. What we'd like to do is make sure that we're mindful of the timing so that people can absorb that new language, so that people can absorb the intent of the program, get it into their daily process, and then look at bringing in the next rollout.
I absolutely love that. And one thing that your organization has gotten very, very strong at as well, apart from the rebrand from Tealwood to LifeSpark, but also taking on specific communities and bringing them under your portfolio. Can you tell us a little bit about, I guess, the challenges, but also the successes that you've seen in bringing on specific communities and rebranding them to whatever that new brand
Absolutely.
would be? Yeah.
And there are definitely complexities, and I know that we have companies here today that have some of the same complexities we do, where there are multiple ownership groups that we work with, so they have an individual brand. So oftentimes our LifeSpark brand, the programs we program as LifeSpark, we have the underlying, flipping some of the colors in the websites, but it can be a balance, because some of our acquisitions will be under a certain brand. So we have a brand of buildings that are Bowden, and they have a specific structure, and they have a completely different programming than maybe our traditional IL buildings. So it's the same concept as the corporate rollout. It is information, making sure that the residents, families, and staff for the new acquisition are notified well ahead of time, that they're given all of the whys on why the ownership group is either changing a management group, which we're taking on a grouping of new buildings this fall.
Right.
And we're working on those communications now, letting them know what our history is and the depth of our legacy so they can trust us. So it's going into both staff, residents, and family, letting them understand that there was a reason behind the acquisition, and that our goal is to do well, to treat you well, and to always be better. And if you can get that message across from the outset, and then also with staff, they're looking at, well, are we going to get a raise, or are we going to lose our job? Can we see the benefits? Can we? So having those timelines right from the outset, having yourself organized prior to the first conversation, where you are absolutely, we might not share all of those details with you today, but here are the dates we have set up in order to talk about those details.
Just being completely transparent with the communication.
100%.
From a resident perspective, what are some of the challenges that you've seen in rebranding a specific community with, making sure that they're feeling, that same, you're trying to make people's lives as good as they can possibly be, right?
Right.
So, what are some of the challenges that go through their minds going through that rebrand?
It's very similar to the staff.
Yeah.
It's who's going to take care of me.
Yeah.
So their concern is, is the staff going to say the same?
Right.
Is the person who's going to do that most intimate care, give me my shower on Wednesday, is that going to be the same person after the first of the month?
Right.
Am I going to have to get used to all new people?
Yeah.
Are my services going to be the same? Because oftentimes you'll go through an acquisition and the structure of your company is very different, or the way we perform care delivery is different. So ensuring that we've educated them to how we deliver care and the reasons why we deliver care the way we do. And so it's the same concept of transparency, authenticity, so they know that if there's something they don't agree with that we do, then we can talk about that, because our goal is never to stay the same.
Very cool. When we're talking about rebranding specific communities, what kind of market research do you do when you're taking a look to see, what you should be changing about specific communities when you take them on?
That's all a part of the due diligence when we're going through the acquisition process. So it is, first of all, when you're looking at that market through the acquisition process and determining you're looking at the pro forma going, is this doable? Is the amount of money that we feel like we need to put in? So for instance, we had an acquisition in January where we needed to put about $2 million in just to bring it up to a standard that we felt like was a good standard. It's a mid-range assisted living, and so not a luxury property, but mid-range.
Right.
And in order to get it to that point, where we were going to see the NOI on that investment, and with that particular building, those numbers fleshed out. So it's your typical market research that you would do if you were building a new building. But in addition to that, it's making sure that your due diligence is very deep. So what are the potential construction problems, constraints, costs on any sort of remodeling? What do we anticipate the increase in staffing wages for that market? So making sure you're doing a really deep wage analysis, and then whether or not the competition, there's projected new inventory coming into the market. So all of the same things you're going to do with a new build.
Very cool. When you originally launched the rebrand of a community, what types of fluctuations do you see on things like lead generation or occupancy, different aspects like that? Do you notice a massive shift during that rebrand process?
We've seen it both pop,
Yeah.
high and low.
Okay, cool.
So it does. It takes a minute when you're doing a full rebrand, right? Because it's a whole new domain, website, so you're not getting that immediate traction. But then we've done an acquisition where the families, the residents, the staff, it was very obvious by the Google reviews that a new management system was going to be a huge benefit, and the market responded with that. So it was a lot of outreach and notification of our professional referral sources that saw, okay, we know what LifeSpark does. Right. We know that this particular, and I'm not anybody who's going to criticize another company for how they run.
Right.
It's just that sometimes you have uniquenesses in a market where it just doesn't work for you. So we were able to see a huge uptick in referrals just because they needed a change, similar to, but maybe not as elemental as a restaurant saying, under new management, and they're like, okay, let's try that.
Yeah, fair enough. From our audience here, do you guys have any specific questions that you'd like to get answered about the rebranding of specific communities or anything like that? Tam. So the question is, what are the major challenges that you saw, sorry, Tam, what are the major challenges that you saw during the specific?
Biggest challenge, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, no, that's okay. Boy, I'm going to be very honest and transparent here, and I'm going to use my own experience as that challenge. And that is a little bit of pride in that we were doing a really great job as Tealwood. And I think the challenge is that you have to be able to be very, very open to say, we are in a constant movement of change, and we have to be open to that. And when you've done something for a really long time, much of the management group that was Tealwood, that stayed with LifeSpark and is still with LifeSpark today, we had worked for Tealwood for over a decade, and we had many in senior management that had been there over 20 years. So when you're you're working with another company that didn't have that service line, you're both trying to get to know each other. So it's being vulnerable. And so the challenge was being vulnerable enough to say, you've got some really great ideas. I wish I would have thought of that. And bringing those ideas together. There is our LifeSpark core side of the business, which is home care, hospice, physician rounding groups, and now some other new programs that we're rolling out, urgent care at home. So we're trying to avoid hospitalizations with bringing our physicians right to the building as opposed to sending someone to the hospital. We have an entire marketing team on the LifeSpark core side. So what was a huge blessing to me and our team was that they're really great people to work with. And they really were fantastic at saying, let's keep the goal the goal. So the challenge was going back every time you think that there's a frustration or a wall and saying, I choose to think the best, and I choose to say we're all working towards this common goal. How can we get there?
Go ahead, Christina. She's got the mic for you.
Your important KPIs change during, did any of your important KPIs change during the process? The traditional ones, leads, tours, move-ins, or usage. Did you look at staff longevity, net promoter scores,
Yep.
Google reviews? Did any of those become more important than your traditional business KPIs?
They really didn't. And I think a big part of that is because our buildings are individually branded. So again, the management company brand is underlying. So the legacy of Delano was still the legacy of Delano, whether they were managed by Tealwood or they were managed by LifeSpark. What changed was that we had new programs to implement. Then your typical brand changes. Some of the language, rollout of new look of our collateral that we designed. And but those KPIs didn't change, and I believe a lot of that is attributed to the fact that the individual building brand didn't change, that it was enhanced. Does that make sense?
So, thank you. Monica, you mentioned that we have a couple of members of your team are in
Yes.
here, and I kind of wanted to ask you, one of the major things, like going through this, like how did you keep your team, how'd you keep their morale up?
One thing we are in our team is very transparent and frank with each other. And I think that if you don't have that level of authenticity and you have that cone of safety where you can be in a meeting and you go, oh my gosh, really? We have to do this? Or, and again, it's all part of that process, and you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, and I think we're good at that. But I think the authenticity was a big piece. The fact that we were able to now relook at our budgets, relook at our focus and our drive, and that impacted some of our team members, just even to wages. Yeah. And so I think, you guys can answer the question as well. What was your motivator to stay on? But we've been able to keep our team together. We've been able to keep most of our marketers that were site level, so we have some longevity there. But I do think being able to be honest and transparent with both your wins and your frustrations is key.
I love that. The last question that we have, unless of course people have questions for Monica as well, is what advice would you give other marketing leaders considering or needing to do a rebrand due to being acquired in the senior living industry?
I would say more communication than less. Yeah. And that's where I learned a lot of lessons, because there were several times I made assumptions. And I think you have to let go of your assumptions and assume nobody knows anything. And have that written communication so that you can not only verbally explain it to somebody so they have something to look back on, and make sure that you really empower your on-site teams so that they not only have the understanding, but they have the information to look back, because they're going to be having a lot of conversations with families, and they'll be repetitive. And there'll be 5 different children revolved around one resident, and you might have that same conversation, and you have to just be prepared to have those repetitive conversations and be okay with it. So if you go in knowing that that's what's going to happen, then you won't be frustrated.
It really comes down to a couple of things. It's communication, empathy, and
Yeah, 100%.
honestly, like just leaving your ego at the door.
Yep.
And I love that. Monica, thank you so much for joining Cup of
pleasure.
Joe. And
All right, thank
yeah.
you.